Gaming.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Intoxicus Flanging. My name's Graham, and as always I hope you all remember to bring a towel. And today I hope you all remember to bring your censorship Cyberpunk 2077 towels, because it's been revealed that Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be censored in Japan. But it should be noted it's not going to be censored in Australia, which is another country that tends to censor things in general, unfortunately. It's going to get an 18 plus rating in Australia, and there's some other places where apparently it's going to get an 18 plus rating, which, yeah, that's better than censorship. So I want to start this video as I usually try and do, with trying to put some background and some history on this so we can have a better, more complete understanding of the topic. And Japan has a long history with censorship. If we go back all the way to the Tokugawa/Edo period, that goes back to like the 1800s or so. So this goes back a long ways. There was mostly political censorship with the intent of to prevent the spread of material disturbing the traditional way of life. And it wound up to be more than just political censorship. There tends to be oftentimes false morality gets wrapped up with this, and so there's the somewhat well-known thing with kabuki theater where males would play female roles quite often. That actually came about because of this censorship. Part of this censorship program by the governments at the time of the Edo period, they banned women and children from acting in kabuki theater. A lot of the theaters ignored this, and I don't think they got punished much, or I didn't go deep into how that all turned out because we don't really have time to go that deep into the history. But it's an interesting thing to learn that, oh, that thing where males played females in kabuki theater in Japan was actually a result of government censorship trying to like stifle art so they wouldn't like go into topics that were too political or do anything that contradicted what the government at the time wanted to flange up. And the focus of the censorship during the Edo period was to control the daimyos, which were the feudal lords of the time. And there's a big issue with the daimyos using Christianity as a political tool, and excuse me, and the Japanese government during the Edo period was trying to do something about that because the Christian political ideals and stuff that were coming over at that time in history were very conflicting with the original Japanese political structure and religions. And just historically, Christianity's had this thing where it's just tried to fucking insert itself into everything, no matter what the result. So just personally, I'm like, well, that's kind of a mixed bag, because there's a bunch of fucked up shit that comes with Christianity, but at the same time, it kind of like, it wound up being wrapped up just because it was like the Western ideal. And, at that time, even though there's like, technically you had freedom of religion in North America, culturally, if you're an atheist for a long time, you had to hide it and pretend you were religious. So what I'm getting at is because of the prevalence of Christianity in Western culture, often with Christianity would also come Western political ideals as a package deal, even though that's in itself kind of conflicting and fucked up. Like, we don't have time to go too deep into it, but the layers behind it are kind of like, if you think about it, because you don't want the religion of Christianity, or I'm not a big fan of it. If you practice Christianity without falling into the traps of extremism that any religion or ideology can fall into, that's great. This isn't about you, but Christianity has a long, extra crappy history in many ways compared to some other religions. Although, don't want to get too far down that road in this video, but if you do want to have a discussion or debate about this, or just kind of talk about it, feel free to hit me up in the comments, Twitter, during a Twitch stream, whatever. As I always say, I'm totally open to having respectful debates and, having my views challenged and all that, as long as it's done respectfully. I'm all for that. So it's that might be a bit of a sensitive topic. I just went on about. So if you have any questions or want me to expand more on my thoughts or just want to debate it or have a criticism, just be respectful about it. Don't come in swearing and insulting and all that stuff. And that's pretty much if you want to come debate or anything like that, that's pretty much the primary ground rule. Just be respectful. Don't swear at people. Don't don't shit on them and all that. So yeah. Anyways, so the next big period in Japan's history, there's several distinct periods of Japan's history where there's like kind of certain cultures that were dominant during those periods and that kind of thing. So there's the Edo period we just talked about, and then after that was what they call the Meiji Restoration, which at this time I will mention Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. He's at part 4 of the series, if I'm remembering, called Supernova in the East, and it's about kind of more Japan's role in World War II and also a lot of what led up to Japan's role in World War II, and it's basically a whole overview of Japan in World War II, but part of that goes back before World War II to kind of like help us understand why Japan was like it was during World War II. Because there's some interesting things. So bit of a tangent, but there's that cliche thing where it's like the Japanese soldier doesn't realize the war is over, and someone finds the Japanese soldier and they think the war's on and it's all crazy and they got to like convince the Japanese soldier that the war's not on. That's real. That's based on real shit. Like that's a real part of the Japanese culture at the time, and it's very fascinating to understand how that came to be. And it wasn't just single soldiers. There's entire squads that it happened to, where they had to get their retired commanding officer that was a civilian and doing normal civilian stuff, get all dressed up in their uniform, go to their squad, the old squad, and be like, yo guys, the war is actually fucking over. So the what I'm getting at is Dan Carlin's Hardcore History talks about the Meiji Restoration because it winds up having an influence on the culture that existed when it comes to World War II. And it just helps to get a bigger perspective on all this kind of stuff and kind of understand Japanese culture a bit. Dan Carlin does excellent work. Historically, his podcast is amazing. He's not always correct. He's just as human as everyone, but he really tries, and that really comes through. And just, I love his podcast so much. I just got to give it a good shout out here because it's just everyone should listen to it, although it can be pretty heavy at times. There's a reason it's called Hardcore History. He doesn't shy away from the more intense aspects of these topics, especially when it comes to war. Anyways, so back to the Meiji Restoration. So there's a big political shift when the Meiji Restoration happened. Western ideas, porn, political things were even more heavily censored. And as I understand it, the idea of the Meiji Restoration was to kind of restore older ideals of Japan. I might be mistaken here. So I'm very much open to correction if I've got that wrong. But anyways, so the point is things shifted towards more censorship with the Meiji Restoration. And this pretty much went on until World War II started, and the stuff going on with the Meiji Restoration directly plays into how Japan's role in World War II played out. But again, we're not here to talk about that. If you're interested in that, listen to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. It's a great starting point, and then from that starting point, you can move on into other sources on the topic. I find it to be just very fascinating history. Because of Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, I've become very much into history. Anyways, we need to move this along because I'm taking a bit too much time shouting out Dan Carlin here, but I can't get over how great his podcast is. Anyways, so World War II happens, that gets all crazy, and don't really need to say too much about that. So during World War II in 1941, there's something called the National Mobilization Law passed in Japan. And that effectively removed freedom of press completely, and all news was heavily censored. The government got involved, and pretty much news only said what the government wanted it to say. So what I'm building up here is Japan has a long, very deep history of government political censorship. And what gets really interesting, and this kind of ties into the like mention of Western ideals and Western politics and Christianity being tied into Western politics and that kind of thing. And also on that note, Christianity's somewhat to a degree become a thing in Japan because of how things played out after World War II. Anyways, the point I'm getting to is after they surrendered in 1945, because the USA nuked two cities, which if we think about that, that's like, yeah, though, again, not what we're here to talk about, but I gotta mention that whole fucking situation is just fucked up. But that's not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is after the surrender in 1945, the supreme commander of the Allied powers, well, I guess more so attempted to, maybe wasn't necessarily fully successful, but more or less abolish censorship in Japan, or at least try to. This resulted in Article 21 of the, or at least directly influenced, Article 21 of the 1947 Constitution of Japan, which actually brought freedom of speech to Japan, which was, like, it's good to have censorship ended and free speech come to any country. We should all have freedom of speech. But the way it happened just seems a bit odd to me because, it seems like, I don't even really have the words for it, but it seems very, I don't even know the word for it, but there's like, it just feels odd to me how, yeah, freedom of speech mostly came to Japan, but it was kind of like imposed by the West because we nuked them into submission. And it's just kind of like, like I don't even really know what to think of that. I guess at least they have freedom of speech, but maybe not the best way to get there. But anyways, so one of the odd results of all this introduction of freedom of speech into Japan is that they actually wound up censoring mentions of censorship, and this became a weird big deal. We don't have time to go deep into it, but it's just like, I read that, I was just like, they censored mentions of censorship? What? Anyways, so, yeah. There's a Wikipedia entry here I wanted to quote on that. Oh, no, I got a little bit mixed up on what I wanted to quote. Oh, no, I'm getting all mixed up. Okay, so here's the quote from Donald Keene from Dawn to the West, that was in the Wikipedia entry on this. Not only did occupation censorship forbid criticism of the United States or other allied nations, but the mention of censorship itself was forbidden. This means, as Donald Keene observes, that for some producers of text, the occupation censorship was even more exasperating than Japanese military censorship had been because it insisted that all traces of censorship be concealed. This meant that articles had to be rewritten in full rather than merely submitting X's for the offending phrases. I'm having a bit of trouble speaking today. I don't know what's up with that, so bear with me if my the rhythm of my speech is a bit more off than usual. I think it's just an autism thing. I'm a bit tired. Yeah, I've been having a bit of insomnia. Anyways, back to the topic. So, that I mean, just that alone is just like, so they brought freedom of speech, but not quite. And so it's just this underlying thing of like, okay, freedom of speech, but then not quite fully, which kind of, I would believe, kind of opens a doorway if they're like, oh, well, we got freedom of speech, but the people who brought it to us had some weird caveat. So, and maybe I'm mistaken in having this thought, this is speculative, but I wouldn't be surprised, and this is something that might not be a conscious thought. There's some of these things that kind of happen on a more subconscious level and then come out in interesting ways. So I wouldn't be surprised if their incomplete freedom of speech that censored mentions of censorship and also censored criticisms of the Allied powers and United States, that might have kind of set up, well, if their version of freedom of speech has these caveats, well, we can have some caveats too. And that maybe not, but I wouldn't be surprised. So eventually in modern times, or sorry, I misphrased that, but when there was laws in Japan that came about, about obscenity that you would think would violate the freedom of speech and the Constitution, but these obscenity laws have held up. So another quote. So this is a quote from Article 175 of the Criminal Code, this was done in 1907. Apparently, it states the following: a person who distributes, sells, or displays in public an obscene document, drawing, or other object shall be punished by imprisonment with work or not more than 2 years, fine of not more than 2,500,000 yen, or a petty fine. The same shall apply to a person who possesses the same for the purpose of sale. So, yeah, they basically made an exception to freedom of speech here. And it gets interesting because with like hentai and other things, people have attempted to challenge this law and directly say this violates freedom of speech, and they've not been successful, which is very disappointing and very interesting. So, Japan's become famous for some very unique niche porn like tentacle porn and other things because they can't show genitalia legally. With the internet nowadays, VPNs not going to be much of a problem to access whatever they want to access, but I forget the district, but there was like an experimental district they had in, I think it was in Tokyo, where it's just kind of like porn could do almost whatever it wanted, I think. I forget the details of it. I can't remember the name of the district that experiment ended several years ago, so it's been an interesting, contentious thing with Japanese law and Japanese culture is, there's, as long as it's all consensual, there's not, and, it's no one's being harmed, there's nothing wrong with porn ethically, as long as it's consensual and no one is harmed. At least harmed without their consent. That's the thing. You get into some fetishes and people will be harmed, but they're consenting to it because that they enjoy it, and that's fine because they consented to it. Kind of the same thing as sparring in martial arts. We're punching and kicking each other. We're causing, well, it should be very mild harm, because if you're sparring, you're not supposed to go hard enough to actually hurt a person. But, there is still pain and potentially damage, but you consented to that. But also with sparring, you only consented to a certain level of it. So if someone goes too far, then that's not what you consented to with sparring. So there are nuances, and it's not just, there's nuance and depth, and consent is a huge deal, and we should move on. So nowadays with Japanese censorship, there is more talk of changing these obscenity laws and loosening it up and changing this, because really, if you're being objective, it doesn't make sense. And so all this background that took almost 20 fucking minutes leads up to what's being censored in Cyberpunk 2077. I didn't think it'd take that long to go over the history, but I think I took a good 5 minutes talking about how awesome Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast is. Anyways, so what's actually being censored in Cyberpunk 2077 in Japan is nudity, genital-shaped objects, and intestines. Nudity is going to be covered with underwear. They're just going to modify or edit out any intestines or phallic-shaped, genital-shaped objects or anything like that. Dismemberment remains. So yeah, it's very interesting. It's very much in line with I was going to say regular Japanese censorship. I'm not sure if that's the best phrasing with what's the norm that's been expected from Japanese censorship when it comes to sex. That's, it's nothing too new or outrageous when it comes to that context. But, back to the question, is this, how bad is this? Do we have to really be upset or worried about this? And maybe not. There's already, there's already cultural shifts and political shifts in Japan, as far as I'm reading, where these obscenity laws and things are being heavily questioned, and hopefully will end soon. So I'd say yes, the fact that it's being censored like this is negative. It should not be censored like this, but potentially this could maybe help push the effort to end that kind of censorship and the obscenity laws that are not congruent with freedom of speech. So it might be more of a mixed bag where it's bad on the surface, but if you go deeper, it could actually wind up kind of pushing things to a better direction, because what's probably going to wind up happening, as someone mentioned in a Twitter comment I noticed, they can just download it with a VPN to get the North American version. Because usually how this works is, you go on Steam, it's got your region setting, and it goes by your IP2 potentially, because that's now a thing, thanks to all that Netflix stuff with changing your regions and all that. So they've been a bit stricter about regional controls and that thing in various ways. I'm not sure how much that's gone to Steam and stuff, but just the hypothetical scenario is you use a VPN to make yourself look like you appear. Try that sentence again. Use a VPN to make yourself appear as if you're in North America. Tell Steam you're in North America. Download the North American version. You bypass the censorship. And, when the censorship is so easy to bypass like that, like, what's the fucking point? And I think I think it's meta currently developing with censorship where all sorts of entities are going to wake up to this realization of, well, with the internet and VPNs, how the fuck are we going to censor anything on the internet? And, there's a bigger picture discussions that are more deserving of an extra flange, where there's efforts to directly censor the internet and control the internet more. It's already being done in China, but, there's people still bypassing it in China. It's just, it's one of those things where people can undo whatever people do. So, yeah, of course they're bypassing it. It's just how much effort and work do they have to go to, and how much effort and work do they have to go to make sure they don't get caught by the Chinese government, specifically with the Chinese government's censorship network. So, and I guess if anything, there might be a concern also of the slippery slope can be a logical fallacy, but it also can be valid. It's one of those fallacies where it depends on how it's being used. There are very real slippery slopes, but there are times and people also that use slippery slope as a fallacy. So I do feel there's a very real slippery slope where, we can start at like an obscenity law that sounds reasonable, and then that keeps on going and spiraling into something like super crazy. And I can't think of historical examples offhand, but I'm certain it's happened. Examples offhand not coming to me. But yeah, so trying to wrap this up before we get too deep on time. I kind of feel this one's a mixed bag. I feel it's without question bad that such things are being censored. It should be just given an adult rating, and I'm not against adult ratings. And when I was younger, I was more like, oh, whatever, just, all these ratings are silly and all that. Now I've matured and understand a bit more, it's like, yeah, parents should have something to help them understand what is in this game that they're going to buy for their kid. And that's more what it's for. It's for parents to understand what they're purchasing for their kids so they can make that decision for themselves. Some parents might be more permissible with such things, some might be less permissible, and that's up for the parent to decide. I have my own opinions on such things. I do question if maybe I played some games that, even if I played them at that age, maybe my parents should have been there to give me some more context that they weren't there to give me, and kind of play the game along with me to help me understand some of the more adult things if they were to let me play those games at such a young age. But, I question maybe I should have been allowed to mature for a few more years before I was allowed to play some of the games I played. I don't know. I question is all. So, yeah, let me know what you think. Do you think this is bad? Do you think it's not really anything to worry about? Do you agree that it's kind of a mixed bag where it's bad on the surface, but it could actually maybe potentially help push things away from this kind of censorship by showing how ineffective and silly the censorship is? Because I see potentially this could be used in court to be like, well, if we go to all this work and effort to try and censor the stuff, then they just bypass it so easily, and it actually objectively violates freedom of speech to have such an obscenity law. Um, you know, the limit for freedom of speech in terms of objective ethics, at least in my opinion, should be harm to others. And that gets to be a slippery slopes, if and potentially a slippery slope. And, if you want to debate that thought or criticize it or have questions about it, jump in the comments or, questions, thoughts, criticisms, all that stuff. Again, as long as it's all respectful and, not being just outright swearing and insulting and all that stuff. I'm totally open to debate and have my ideas challenged. That's what this is supposed to be all about. We're supposed to be exchanging ideas and discussing them and debating them and trying to figure out what are the good ideas, what are the bad ideas. So, yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know what your flange is. And, there's the comments here are generally preferred because it helps this video get favored in the algorithm. But, hit me up on Twitter, hit me up in the Twitch streams. The Twitch streams might be one of the best places to have an active debate or discussion, just because we're actually there and it can be a bit more dynamic and there's not this time delay. But then also with comments and stuff, you got more time to really think out what you want to write. So let me know what your opinion is. I'm very curious to know what other people think about this kind of stuff. And with that, if you like this content, give me that thumbs up. Also subscribe and notifications if you haven't. If you don't like, give me that thumbs down. But if you give me the thumbs down, please offer me some constructive criticism in a respectful manner. Also, please try and be specific. Vague, unspecific criticism is just hard to take action on. And before we wrap up, give a quick shout out to the Patreon supporters and the Valve Index GoFundMe donors. The Valve Index won't be possible without all you guys. And a quick note on the Valve Index. Unfortunately, it appears I got a mildly defective one. There seems to be a problem with the adhesion on the left lens, and liquid and small particulates have been able to get under the lens, it appears. So I will be doing an RMA on the Valve Index. Defects happen. Valve support's been really cool about it, but just to let everyone know, I want to focus more on the YouTube content. There's a lot of YouTube content I've planned that's just fallen by the wayside for reasons I need to make changes on. And so while the Valve Index is going in for RMA, I think I might use that as an opportunity to take a break from Twitch streaming just so I can focus more on the YouTube content and make the YouTube content stronger and of higher quality. And also as a side effect, it'll help make it easier to get to that 3 average viewers by just clearing that average out a little bit. So yeah, I'll probably be taking a break from Twitch streaming for a couple 3 weeks or so, depending on the RMA turnaround time. And yeah, just want to keep you all updated on that. And I think that about covers everything. I usually forget something or another, so whatever I forgot, hopefully it's not too important. And with that, have a good one, and remember to bring a towel, and let's hope I can get this outro music flanged up smoothly, which I'm one day I'll figure out how to get this done smoother. Yeah, have a good one. Remember to bring a towel.